Hey folks, welcome to our first videocast of our Get Real About Safety. This is Pam Fisher and I'm here in the studio with Lilly because she insisted on being here with us this morning, where we are going to talk about the new view of safety, the things that work and the things that don't work, and to help you break down old paradigms and improve safety performance in your organization. We are focusing on managing COVID-19 exposures in construction in this special edition. All right, well, good morning and thanks for participating in this podcast. And we are today going to be talking about managing the COVID-19 exposures in construction. And I've got a couple of folks here today, and I think I'll introduce you. Well, let me go ahead and do both of you first. I have Hilarie Warren. And Hilarie is a CIH, or Certified Industrial Hygienist. She's Senior Consultant with the OSHA 21D program at Georgia Tech. She's been there for the past 15 years, assisting businesses with both compliance and best practices, and particularly in health. And Hilarie's got a specific focus on assisting and minimizing health hazard exposures in construction. And she has just been super visible in the construction here in the Southeast, helping folks out and participating in a lot of really good new stuff. So we're really glad to have her here. She's also course director and instructor over the OSHA Training Institute, and she is the current president of American Industrial Hygiene Association, Georgia section. Pretty awesome. Lisa, I did not get your bio. I've known you for many years. You want to give a quick introduction for yourself here?
I have, so thanks, Pam. I've been working in the construction industry for just over 30 years. CSP, CHST, and have worked in the Atlanta community with Hilarie, with you all, with ProSafe, and a lot of wonderful peer groups out here, just really trying to maintain safe and healthy workplaces, work on best practices, and I've been able to work on several partnerships where we've, had the benefit of developing some best practices, working with peer contractors and subcontractor markets, really to spread the good word and improve the health and safety in the workplace for employees.
Awesome. I was also going to mention that you have been highly involved in some of the real high signature projects out there, like the Brave Stadium and Piedmont Hospital, and too many to name, but you've done some pretty phenomenal, had some pretty phenomenal results. So I am the host today here with ProSafe Solutions, Pam Fisher, and been in construction, safety, and health now for over 35 years. So been around doing that for quite some time and seen an awful lot of changes out there, but never seen anything like we are experiencing here today. And I have relied on the two of you heavily because I'm more in the role of, by the way, I'm also adjunct faculty at Georgia Tech and course director there for many of the courses, and heavy focus in construction and safety management and human performance. So I'm more in a training and consulting and facilitation role these days than in the field, and you guys are right there on the front line. So I really have heavily relied on you guys, and a lot of our best practices have been flying around that you guys are coming up with. And just also want to add that we will have some resources for folks in the speaker notes here after this gets posted, and a lot of that's been supplied by the two of you. But I wanted to start out by asking this first question. Well, I'd like it to direct it first here. Before I get to my first question, Hilarie, would you mind just giving a little overview of what you're seeing and what your thoughts are with today's world?
Sure. Yeah, it's changing every day, it seems like, and then throughout the day. So there's plenty of numbers out there, and those are changing rapidly, and I'm almost even not really trying to keep up with them, just because they are mind-boggling, and we know they're going to get worse. And so I'm just sort of instead trying to focus more on the proactive measures that we can take. But I think it is important, as we are trying to make decisions kind of in real time. You know, there's the healthcare professionals that are trying to make decisions in real time, but then there's businesses that are trying to make decisions in real time on whether they're going to shut a job down, right? Or they're going to continue, or looking at these definitions of what's essential work and what's not. So what we're seeing is good news. I was on a webinar yesterday and listening to the researchers at Duke University who, are now moving forward with the disinfection of PPE that has once just been determined to be one-time use, and now really putting it into these containers and disinfecting with vaporized hydrogen peroxide, and it's working, and that's what we're going to do for the meantime. We've got clinical trials underway, right? So we're looking at medicines that are already out there and available on the market, and looking at whether or not they're going to have some sort of effectiveness for this affected population. So that's like the good news, right? Like, we can always start with the good news, and certainly seeing people being kinder and people stepping up and people donating supplies. Our offices at Tech last week went in and unloaded all of the PPE that we have for classes and use for ourselves during consultation on site, and put all of the N95s and booties and gloves, face shields that we have, and donated them to the healthcare workers here. So that's all the good stuff, right? And I know you all have your own individual stories that you've heard too. But otherwise, what we're seeing, I think, is still a lot of question, and it's variable from community to community at this point. And that's what's really frustrating for me as a public health person, is not seeing consistency and enforcement. And that's the name of the game, even not during a crisis, I think, but it just becomes even more important right now, is that we're not seeing the enforcement of what we really need to, which is people need to stay home if they can stay home. They really need to start tightening their circles of who they have contact with. And I know that's easier said than done, depending on what industry you're in and what your location is, even globally in the world, right? Like, I have the privilege of being able to be in my home and really closing that circle down. And people who live in different circumstances, not single family homes, who rely on mass transportation to get where they need to go, that's an entirely different situation. So I know we're going to talk a lot today about this term social or physical distancing and what it means on a job site. But I do want to just sort of start there from a public health perspective, that sure, we're going to talk about disinfection, we're going to talk about PPE, and we're going to talk about, what are the things that we can do to continue to operate from a business perspective, I think. But at the top of the list, in terms of what can we do, we need to just try to stay home as much as possible. And so I have to start with that as a preventative, proactive measure, both as a public health person and as a CIH. When we are looking at control strategies, you go to the top of the food chain, which is your substitution or elimination or engineering controls. And for this particular hazard, it means being apart from each other as much as we can. So that colors everything that I'm going to say for the remainder of our time together and the messages that I've been giving people that we work with.
So that's the challenge then, is to do social distancing and still have construction operating. And we've got the whole conversation that's going on about what is essential construction and what is not. And I'm going to let you guys talk about more about that. But Lisa, I'm going to have you jump in and what has been your challenge and how you manage that social distancing.
Well, I think, there's several challenges that go along in the construction industry with social distancing, and getting people to understand that social means physical. I think that's one of the bigger issues. The first issue that we have to work through. Getting people to take it seriously is another thing. I think we're getting to a point now in our world that we are starting, almost every one of us now are starting to have relatives or friends of relatives that have been affected or are currently being affected by this virus. So it's more relatable. And I think unfortunately, this is one of those that the more relatable it is, the more serious people take it. I see on construction sites, there are those that haven't quite figured it out. They may maintain social distancing on the project and be forced to do that with the way work has been rescheduled and reallocated, but yet there might be 4 people that ride to work in the same car, together, and how they get to and from is different than how they actually work. And I don't think the correlation is there for them that they go together. It's not social distance at work and then get back together, with everybody, on the ride home or after work in other social situations. But I think getting people to understand social distancing and then working with crews to help them figure out how are they going to get the job done, staying, a safe distance apart, or what's considered a safe distance apart. And then what situations are out there that don't allow that social distancing to take place, and then how do we work around that? And is it critical work that we have to get done now, or is it something that we can push a little bit until we figure out a better way to do it? Or can we restructure the work to minimize those situations where people have to work closer than 6 feet? And then what parameters do we have to work within? What PPE do we need in those situations that we have to work together, such as pulling wire? I happen to work right now with some of our healthcare groups, and that is kind of an easy transition to see that it's essential work. Especially one of the projects right now, we were able to get our CEO yesterday, and the hospital has moved up their activity dates to start moving patients over next week versus in 3 months like it was originally scheduled. So they are in need of the hospital space. We may end up building out more space for them to get that work accelerated so that they can use the space that's being anticipated with this current pandemic and the patients that they're starting to see now. But how do we work around it? We're going to have to work 24/7 to get that space available. But then again, there are going to be some things that we're going to have to work around and work through on how do we get it done as safe as possible within the parameters that we have to work with, and follow the CDC guidelines, the WHO guidelines, and just safe work practices in general.
So you mentioned like pulling wire. I mean, I'm just trying to visualize in my mind different tasks that we do, from rigging to, pouring concrete. How are you doing those things? How are you managing things like pre-work meetings and any kind of training?
Well, it's interesting because I think we really have to change the way we think about how we're doing our work. I'm lucky enough to have some great contractors and subcontractors to work with. And I think this has enabled us to, while we considered ourselves a team before, I think this has really pulled everyone together to help us understand that, hey, we're going to have to kind of do some non-traditional things. Just something as simple as bringing folks on board and getting them through orientation. Orientations now are no more than 10 people. We are lucky enough to have some spacing to be able to space those folks out where they're 6 feet or more apart. But you can't, if you're going to man, or really increase the personnel on the job fast, you're going to have to do more orientations, find different ways to do orientations, and that's pulling in our subcontractors and their safety reps and getting them to participate more than they otherwise would from a strict GC orientation standpoint. We have to limit folks getting on the elevators. Normally you're going to put as many people on an elevator to get them up to their workspace as fast as possible. And now we have to get people to understand that no, depending on the size of the elevator, we have to limit to a specific number of folks plus the operator. Dressing out an operator in PPE because that operator is in there all day is another condition, and making sure that they're healthy enough to wear a respirator. They're wearing gloves. We're increasing the times that we're disinfecting, and we've hired a third party to do disinfecting all day in some of these communal spaces. Drywall is another one, folks installing drywall. They're working closely together, installing the large sheets of drywall and figuring out ways to minimize the times that they are working close together, but recognizing that there are some things that somebody is going to have to work in a panel or pull wire with somebody else, and what PPE do we need to add for them for their safety.
Hilarie, if you would jump in on this a little bit, because you had mentioned, we talked about disinfecting, about porta-johns, for example. What are your concerns?
Yeah, I mean, like Lisa said, I think that it's all of the common surfaces that maybe don't typically get regular or thorough cleaning, right? So beyond sort of the porta-john handles and tools and ladders and the scissor lifts. I mean, anything and everything that is shared by people that are have surfaces that are touched by hands have to start being included in a cleaning protocol and or minimized by how many people touch them, right? So it's like Lisa said, it's sort of re-looking at tasks that we commonly do and thinking about how they can be altered, because additional cleaning takes additional time, right? And it takes additional resources. And so while some job sites have the ability to, I think, bring in a third party that is equipped to do that type of cleaning, others are not, right? And so that's going to either fall to personnel that's there on the ground, or they're not going to do it. And who knows what that consistency looks like, or what resources are available to do it. So, part of where we're at now, and I feel like we're all in this just trying to do the best we can at the moment, given the circumstances and what's happening. But this is not going away, right? And even if when we see this downturn, after a few weeks, hopefully we're going to see, cases peak and then start to fall off for a bit. The likelihood that we see another cycle or a third cycle of this, in the next year is out there, just given seasonality for how this is likely going to play out. And so putting protocols in place now, right? Getting people used to doing work in a little bit of a different way, thinking about how we distance folks, what are the surfaces that we want to disinfect, and with what regularity and with what materials, is it's likely not just this one-time thing we're going to be doing over the next month. It's something that we might need to do longer. And so trying to sort of put that together into a protocol for ourselves and companies is what we want to probably be doing. Yeah, the surfaces to disinfect. I think what we're seeing this in our manufacturing clients as well is trying to figure out how close are people on a production line, where can we try to interrupt the chain of transmission with appropriate cleaning steps. And it's just amazing the number of surfaces that we know we all touch, the number of times we touch our faces, all of that kind of stuff, right? And so trying to sort of capture that and think about where the links are going to be, and how we can interrupt them is important. I had a question for Lisa. Can I ask her one?
Right.
So about the orientation, Lisa, we have our general topics that I know are normally covered in orientation. And so has orientation now been amended to include all of this stuff about COVID and what the measures are for the job site and all of that, or is that a separate training?
Well, it's certainly been amended. I know for us, we've amended our typical orientation to include it. We've had separate meetings, I think because it's so new, and I think people, takes the average person 7 times to hear something before it really kind of sinks in. And there's so many parts to this, I think, that are not habit yet for employees. And so, yes, we cover it, separate meetings. I cover it, personally when I'm out on the job and talk to folks about it. It's in orientations. It's in our safety team meetings with the safety reps for our contractors. And, again, really trying to hammer it, down to those folks that are out there managing every day, our superintendents, our foremen, not just for our folks, but for our subcontractors as well, because we all need help reminding everybody, because it just stopping to talk to somebody about an issue maybe on the 10th floor, it's such habit to just walk up to somebody and start talking to them, or maybe turn around and look at the iPad or look at something on the drawing and say, hey, look at this. And, it's a habit we need to step back and say, well, stop, let's talk about it a little bit at a distance, and let's go look, I'm not going to hand you my iPad anymore to look at this part of the drawing. I'm going to stand back and show it to you. So it's really trying to be, overly conscious to make those adjustments and continually remind people. I think it's been a difficult adjustment, but I think because of the news coverage and all the announcements coming out, and the fact that I think it, as difficult as it is for what's going on in different jurisdictions and trying to keep up with what the requirements are in different jurisdictions, it actually helps me as a safety person, because people are highly attuned to what's going on in the next county or what they are and aren't allowed to do. And so it makes them more aware of the current situation versus being standardized. I think it might turn into white noise a little bit more than what it is. So I agree with you that it would be nice if we could have an overarching consistency with things, and it would, in some cases it would help, but the fact that it is different, I actually try to find some positive in it, and that it does reinforce that, hey, there's a lot going on here that we need to pay attention to, and understand that what's going on in the next county or maybe in the next state that's still affecting our company or operations in that state, it could very well be here, and so we really need to pay attention to it.
Hilarie, I've got a like to follow up on that. We were talking about social distancing, and of course, all you got to do is watch the news, and you're hearing different things. We've been hearing the 6 foot, and then that's not enough. Where are we on that?
Yeah, I mean, the 6 foot rule is, I was telling another industry group about this last week, and that it's not just an arbitrary number, right? There are lots of studies that have been conducted well before we got to the situation that we're at, that look at distance that aerosols travel when you sneeze, cough, talk, right? What are the things that are high velocity coming out of your mouth versus what are the aerodynamic principles of droplets in the air, in still air versus turbulent air. So I did want to just make sure that everyone understands that 6 foot didn't just come out of nowhere. It's based on studies that look at droplet transmission. But the 6 foot is it's a good rule of thumb, I think, at the moment, and that's what people were sort of really pushing on in the earlier days of this event, at least here. But I think what we're starting to see more of, and what they're doing more studies on, is trying to look at, well, how long is it suspended in air, the particles, versus, and is there a significant difference in still air versus air where there's movement, whether it's breeze because you're outside, or we're looking at trying to capture the particles in a hospital setting, for example, right? Like, should we be putting ventilation systems around the heads of beds that draw the air that a patient might exhale, more towards the headboard and away from the rest of the room? So we've got all kinds of things that are in play and being researched at the moment. We saw a lot on the news, I think, and maybe in our social media feeds, of people saying, okay, well, they said 6 feet, so that means that then I'm gonna go and drive to a parking lot and open the tailgate to my car and sit in it and still see my friends and, kind of try to have a little bit of distance. And that's really not true social or physical distancing. It's better than nothing. It's better than 3 feet. It's better than 2 feet. But the messaging and the words that are actually being used, I think, are where people are getting confused on what their actions should really be. And this was a conversation that some scientists on another webinar were having recently. Sort of, while people in a public health circle understand what is meant by social distancing, other people need much more direct language, right? Saying, stay 6 feet away or stay 10 feet away. Only go to get groceries once a week. Don't go to work if you're feeling symptomatic. Not just sort of this more generalized, try to keep your distance from people, right? So yeah, I think the more distance that we can input between people, the better. And again, the best way to do that is to try to eliminate as much of the contact that we have had for certain things. If we can do that, that's what we want to be doing. But on the other instances, like Lisa said, I think where we know people have to be in close quarters, whether they're working in a confined space or they're riding people up and down in a buck hoist, consider that a confined space now, right? And have those people in appropriate PPE, because they're not able to achieve that true physical distance that we need them to have. But I think it's really important that this message carry over, like Lisa said, outside of the workplace and into the messages that we've got for people once they leave the job site and are returning to wherever they're living, whether it's communal living, it's driving together in a car, van share, whatever, and knowing that especially if they are in a situation where they're living communally with other people who are also having to leave that space and go to work, wherever that is, that continues to just widen this circle of exposure potential. And that's, while they might be taking really good precautions on Lisa's job site, they're not necessarily at the job site where their cousin is working and who they're living with, right? So I think trying to get that message drilled down to the home life outside of work is really important.
So I'd like to also go back to, you mentioned appropriate PPE, and Lisa's talking about PPE. I don't know which one of you want to jump in here, but what is appropriate for riding in a buck hoist? And what is our availability out of the jobs now, since we know that we were, basically asked to contribute PPE to healthcare? Do we have a scarcity still of PPE on our jobs? Who wants to jump in?
Well, I'm very interested to hear what Lisa's got going on her job sites. And maybe I'll let her answer that first, and then talk about sort of what might be appropriate.
Lisa?
Well, it certainly has evolved from when we started, almost 3 weeks ago to where we are now, and probably where we'll be, in 2 weeks. It will increased, and to both yours and Hilarie's point, it is really getting hard to find PPE now for the construction folks to be able to do their work in a manner that protects them and protects the other employees. So for instance, an elevator or hoist operator that's in there all day, and right now, today I'm at an existing facility, so we're using the elevators right now, but that employee's on there all day, every day. So a respirator, some nitrile gloves certainly help him do his job a little bit better. But again, that's, he's that individual's in an N95. We've just fit tested him, done all the requirements for that, medical questionnaire, gotten approved by a physician. But the availability of those respirators is they're hard to come by. We have a few, but like everybody else, we have donated to local hospitals, to try and help them get prepared and make it through, some scarcity of supplies. And also we're waiting to hear what is appropriate, what can we do from the conversations that CDC is having, World Health Organization groups, that Hilarie's working with. What can we go to so that we're not using what I would deem critical respirators, and do we move more towards something like a surgical mask that are a little bit easier to get, though still in scarce supply? But using N95s, I think, provides great protection. But is it the right protection for a construction worker moving employees day in and day out? Because we will run out quickly, if that's our method. And listening to the same presentation that Duke had yesterday, it was a great presentation, but the method of decontamination, for the personal protective equipment is something that is not really achievable on the construction side to do that. So, where do we go from here? We can make it for the next 2 weeks with those methods that we have in place. And what we do after that, we continually need to reevaluate it, on a day-by-day, week-by-week basis.
Hilarie, what's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, it's reevaluating everything constantly. And I think looking at you know, a job position like the hoist operator, who in all other circumstances, right, is just in normal PPE gear, but is now, that's going to be one of the more exposed, right, positions that someone could have. So thinking about, well, do we have PAPRs, right? Do we have powered air purifying respirators that maybe we have stored and used for the guys that are typically just doing, you know, deep foundation drilling or some other task, right? Like, can we reissue that type of PPE to someone else at this point? You know, I know that those filters on the PAPRs are also going to become more difficult to find, but it's something to consider for these job tasks that we now are identifying as sort of higher risk just because of the number of people that they're going to be around. And then 95s, you know, there's a listing on CDC's site now, and I know we talked about it earlier this week, and so Pam, I know you'll include that sort of in the speaker notes for this podcast, but just making sure people know that there are options for respiratory protection that are coming from other countries that have gone through similar or identical testing to what we commonly know of as the disposable N95s here, that those are going to be equivalent. And if they're available, then they're available. You know, the concern that I've got as an industrial hygienist and watching work continue to go on, especially on construction sites, is that people are still completing tasks that expose them to things other than the coronavirus, right? Whether it's silica or lead or total particulate or other heavy metals. And so we want to make sure that they continue to be adequately protected during those tasks, and that we're not trading, there's not a trade-off there. And so we've got to think about, I think, looking at what tasks can we delay, what tasks can be done differently, that would lessen the exposure risk either for one of those other types of air contaminants, so that you don't have to have people in as much gear as they normally would be to perform that job, so that those resources can be redirected to things that are more risky for this viral impact. But all of that also requires time and pre-planning and looking at where the schedule is going and what's happening with the project, and what are the other items that are available. There was a conversation that I was hearing about the use of sort of like the air purification systems that we would use in some types of work activities. Like, Lisa, you've got them on your hospital jobs, right? So that you've got air passing through a HEPA filter, so that when it comes out on the other side, it's clean, right? As a way to contain work that someone might be doing on a pipe or, you know, in an overhead space, that maybe we're using those more if they're available. And I've also heard about them being redirected to hospitals or healthcare settings, so that if construction sites have them, that now they're being asked to share those with folks in the healthcare setting, to help create sort of more isolation wards for those that are needing care. You guys have you been approached for any of that equipment, Lise?
Well, we actually, so we use them in everyday work in the healthcare setting, you know, the negative air machines, and we certainly are having conversations with, you know, the hospitals and the departments about making sure that we create those negative air spaces, to be able to exhaust it, at least from the patient population that they might be treating, that we create those spaces as negative air spaces, so that we lessen the risk anything coming out to the construction spaces on the outside. And normally you kind of would do the opposite. So this is in particular to COVID patients, if you're working in and around those, which we will be. And I know some of our subcontractors already are in the existing hospital. So, their PPE requirements now have been redirected, while those patient rooms, are creating, they are now a negative space. Those subcontractors are now having to dress out if they cannot create a negative space because of conditions. They're exhausting, to roof areas. So we have to be careful. It's another area of concern that we can't get up there and do roof work anymore. We have to coordinate new construction versus ongoing construction, but they're dressing out in Tyvek suits, and respirators and, gloves, and, the availability of the equipment, even though you're creating those negative spaces, you still have folks that still have to work in there. And even from a comfort level, for those employees, they don't, they don't want to go in unprotected, regardless of what the potential risk is. If it's a very low risk, they still want to dress out. And so again, trying to find that equipment now, both with our supply. I've called, this morning I've called 5 different suppliers for Tyvek suits, for respirators, for cleaning supplies, I don't want to get to the last 3 pairs of gloves or 3 Tyvek suits or respirators, but the orders that I have now continue to be pushed out because they're being redirected to more critical areas, which is really how it should be. But again, trying to figure out what the solutions are to continue to work, to continue to support, the true critical construction projects that support the healthcare systems, is challenging, and again, it's something we are looking at. Negative air machines, and where we traditionally might not have used them, can we create safer spaces with them? But like you said, they're either being redirected again to more hospital spaces, and then we have to look at those areas that we just can't create negative spaces, because of existing conditions in there.
Lisa, I also wanted to ask you, you mentioned about people being hesitant to work somewhere unprotected. What is the overall feeling you're getting from workers? Are they worried? Are they scared? Are they not scared enough? What do you pick up out there from your folks?
Yes, all of that. We have those that are scared to death. We have those that I think have a healthy respect and general understanding of what's going on and try to do the right thing. And then there are those, just like we see out in the communities, that really, for whatever reasoning they have, they really don't understand and give, a whole lot of credence to what's going on and what we really need to be doing to flatten the curve. So on the construction side, it's not any different. And again, there are those that I think they understand from a job site perspective, because we're doing signage, we're doing additional hand wash stations, we've added things and are doing things on the job, restricting, elevator usage, number of folks, spreading people out. We've completely redone how we do our typical job-wide safety meetings, orientations, and that, we've had to rethink that, and we have different solutions for different jobs. But then again, there's still a handful of folks. I saw a delivery vehicle a couple of days ago that I know their company has a good policy put in place to address the current situation with COVID-19, but probably unbeknownst to management, those groups, several folks piled into the delivery truck to go ride to the job to get the material delivered and offloaded and out to where it needs to go. So, you know, it's difficult, you know, and to the points made earlier, some of these folks otherwise would take public transportation, or they don't have any other transportation. So it's the only way they know to get the job done and continue to bring a paycheck in, which I know is a big concern for everybody.
So variables in risk tolerance and risk perception is our life outside of this. But you mentioned when it gets more real, that may change some of that perception. Unfortunately, it may be a little late. So we are now almost, or I think we're right up on an hour, and we wanted to try to cut it off. I'd like to hopefully do another version of this as we go along. And then again, maybe we can bring in some of the folks that were not able to come today, but I'd like to just maybe start with you, Hilarie, and do you have any parting words or thoughts here for us?
Yeah, I mean, I think now more than ever, if we can continue to just encourage our folks to be cognizant of where they're getting information, right? And that we want hopefully to be on our job sites good sources of information, or help direct people on where to get it. That, you know, I got an email from my dad this morning, right? He was forwarding on something that he was like, this is good information from Johns Hopkins. And I had to send it back to him and say, this didn't come from Johns Hopkins. You know, this is making the rounds on email and in social media. And while some of the information in it is okay, some of it has not been validated. So we just have to be, you know, sort of informed consumers of our info. And there are an increasing number of resources that I think are available specifically for construction, which I'm really glad to see. You know, the initial focus was really pushing towards healthcare settings, obviously, and other types of industry, but the groups that do work in construction research, you know, are continuing to do that. And so CPWR and CDC and the Department of Public Health, those are where we want to go for information for this particular group, I think. And I, you know, the other parting thought besides information is while everyone is vulnerable and everyone is capable of transmitting currently this COVID-19, it is still primarily those in higher risk categories. And so I think that's a message that while we can't, I don't think we're at a place yet where on job sites, you know, you're saying you can work and you can't. We want to make sure that folks understand that those individuals with underlying conditions are still most at risk of hospitalization and or worse, right? And so we're looking at the data that just came out, I think this morning, you know, 94% of those that were hospitalized and then subsequently died so far, you know, have been those in the higher risk category. So those that are older, those that have, you know, underlying heart or lung conditions, whether it's high blood pressure, diabetes, COPD, asthma, have previously had cancer, all of those are higher risk factor health conditions. And I think we really want to be trying to communicate that to our workforce so that they hear that from all angles, whether it's online, you know, through the news, and then also at work, so that we're trying to convey that we, you know, we care about everybody, obviously, and we're putting all of these measures in place to try to protect everybody, but we've got some folks who are at higher risk, and they are on our job sites, and we need to be watching out for everybody And it's all a responsibility for everyone that's on a job site and continuing to show up for work. So I think the messaging is also really important, trying to put things in the most simple terms, in the most real terms, and the most proactive terms that we can, if we're going to continue to work in spaces together through this.
Lisa?
So to Hilarie's point, it's a huge responsibility that we have to our employees and then to the community at large, and we have to get it right. Certainly, this caught, I think, pretty much all of us off guard. I don't think, even though we've thought about it, what might we do? What general programs do we have in place to deal with a situation that might be like this? I think a lot of us are learning right now, and I can't tell you how much I appreciate my peers, my peer contractors, the ability to reach out and have people answer a call for shared information. And what are you doing in this situation? How are you handling this? What solutions have you found for this? The fact that people are trading so much information, I think has certainly helped us. It's helped our communities at large. And it's helped us develop a program. Obviously, it's changing every day, and we're trying to improve on it every day and answer the calls for, the new things that are coming out from the Department of Health, from CDC, and get it right every day. But making sure that our employees are protected, that we can still go to work every day. It is a huge privilege to be able to be considered an essential workforce right now, and we need to do right by it, because it can all be shut down in a heartbeat. And I think if we just take a minute to look around and see who's not working, and most of that is not by choice, we could all be in that situation. So getting it right, sharing information, relying on accurate and good information, and then teaching our workforce every day and reminding them every day what's the right thing to do and how to solve these problems in a simple way is really where we need to focus our time and attention to.
Well, thank you both for joining us here today. And I think there was a lot of good conversation. If you would, please also check the speaker notes. We will try to put those good resources there that folks can rely on. And if anyone watching or listening would like to let us know other areas you'd like us to touch on in a future podcast, we'll try to do that. Thanks again, and stay safe out there and flatten the curve.
Thank you.
Thank you.